the purpose here, imagine if Bitcoin had been built from the very beginning to be something that would give birth to 1,000 cryptocurrencies. You design it somewhat more differently, right? And that's what network school is. I know I don't have all the answers. Some people will do vegan network states, and some people will do carnivore network states, and some people will do like Latin immersion, and there'll be Mennonites, and there'll be Catholics, and there'll be Jains and Sikhs, and all different kinds of different groups. People, Catalonians, Basques, language groups, cultural groups, ethnic groups, all kinds of stuff that I can't even predict.
What's going on, guys? Today we got a great episode with Balaji Srinivasan. He's back and he delivers. We talk about geopolitics. What's going on with China? Why are they getting stronger? What's going on with the US decline? How is India as a chessboard piece going to actually play both with China and the US? We talk about Bitcoin, gold, land, and guns. And Balaji explains what's going on with the network school and what he's actually been building all the way out there near Singapore. This conversation's great. I always enjoy talking to my friend Balaji, and you guys will enjoy this one as well. Here's my latest conversation with Balaji Srinivasan.
Is this Pomp coming on the Network State podcast, or is this Balaji going on the Pomp show? I guess it's a double header. Right?
All right, Balaji, we got a lot to talk about. Let's start with the U.S. decline and China's strength. You had a great tweet thread where you talked about the fact that the country that positions itself as the most powerful is doing that on purpose. They want to show strength to the world. China, who people deem is behind, actually wants to appear weak while it grows strength. Explain the dichotomy between these two countries that really seem to be the leaders of what seems to appear to be this multipolar world we're headed towards.
Yeah. So basically the thing is that I believe in American values, and I believe in the America that we both grew up in. And so I just want to preface everything by saying that I am a reality shill. Right. So to say I am a shill for observable physical reality. Right. So where the numbers are, I try and figure out where the numbers, what the actual reality is. And then I kind of shape my worldview accordingly, as opposed to vice versa. Right. Okay. So that in mind, let me show you some numbers from the post that you're mentioning. So this post over here, okay, shows what some people call the skull graph. Right. And can you see the screen there?
Yes.
Okay. So this shows that on a number of different kinds of charts, China has passed the US. Okay. So it's passed the US in energy consumption. It flipped over here in about 2010. It passed in manufacturing value add. That also flipped in about 2010. It recently actually passed in the Nature Index of highly cited papers around 2022. And you can argue with that, measure, but within academia, it's one of the better measures we have, because there's a lot of subjects like, especially in material science, in the physical world, where it's just very hard to build in America. And so China's pushing ahead civil engineering on a scale that humanity's never seen, just giant bridges and tunnels and all this kind of stuff, right? So some of it at least is plausible that they're pushing forward areas of applied science, and then you can argue with some of the others. And, if there's more charts like this. This is their chart. Do you see this one of robot stock?
Yep.
Right. This is another one of the electricity generations from our world and data. This is cars, right? They just went vertical starting in about 2020. They beat Japan and Germany, who are no slouch in cars, like the place, Japan does Honda and Nissan, Germany has Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Those countries are known for craftsmanship. They're known for automobiles for generations, but the flip to an electric car meant that China could flip them because it, as it changes architecture car. And actually, even as amazing as Elon is, BYD is now outselling Tesla in many markets, right? Which is a Chinese, competitor. And I can show many graphs like this. But the point is that in some ways, like a lot of the stuff on China that said, oh, China's, it's going to fall into a ditch. It's going to get old before it gets rich. I think of that as like the stealth on the Chinese stealth bomber. Mm-hmm. Which is to say, during the Cold War, the U.S. never underestimated the Soviet Union. If anything, you could argue it overestimated the Soviet Union. And in the 80s, it said, it thought that they were closer to being a peer than they were, and then it collapsed, and so on and so forth. I think that with China, there's a reversal. Maybe because with the Soviets, they had also fought in World War II. It was tangible that they had military strength, like you're going head to head against them, with the Chinese, the competition is entirely economic. Fortunately, there hasn't been a direct physical confrontation. You can argue Russia-Ukraine is actually not Russia-Ukraine. You can argue Russia-Ukraine is actually China versus US. You know why? Because China's supplying, the Russian side and the US is supplying the Ukrainian side. So that's like Vietnam. It's like a proxy war, right? Between China and Russia, right? Or China and America. And you can argue that because China is also supplying the Ukrainian side, but it's also supplying the Russian side. Okay. Point being that, when all of these graphs on undeniable things in the physical world are all just pointed like this, right? Because the number of cars, that's something you can test. You go to a neutral market. You go to a market that's even pro-American, like in South America or something like that. I can show 50 more graphs like this where China's just flipped the US on many different metrics. And you just look at observable physical reality and you see these Chinese cars whizzing around and you see, just lots of signs in Chinese and Panama and stuff like that. It's clear they're building, right? Oh, what happened there? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So let's start there. Basically, on a lot of metrics in the physical world, China is number one or very quickly becoming number one. Let me pause there. I can say more.
So let me give you a real world example of a conversation I had recently. I was talking to one of the founders of a humanoid robot company that's based in the United States. And we were talking about a whole bunch of things. But one of the things he started to talk about was in China, the safety standards that are required are much lower. So they have a robotic strategy in China. They have a safety standard that is conducive to building these humanoid robots. They have a government that is actually subsidizing the adoption of these humanoid robots. So they're going to companies and saying, hey, if you buy these robots, we'll actually pay for them or pay for a part of them. And then also we started talking about the fact that in China, they've already had a marathon or like a half marathon of the humanoids running. They've had a competition of them fighting each other. They've had like all these kind of like sport type things that obviously are trying to drive innovation around humanoids. Mm-hmm. Well, the United States, like, if a humanoid company wants to sell their robot, like OSHA shows up and is like, hey, let me see, like the robot's work permit, essentially, right? Like, let me see what the working conditions are. So I do believe that there is, kind of a different environment. But take humanoids maybe as a direct example. Everyone has become convinced this is going to be a big market. This is going to be very important. What can the United States do to not get their ass kicked on the global stage when it comes to something that, really everyone's kind of starting out at an even playing field of we got to go invent the technology and then we got to go and sell these products into the market?
So the short version, I wrote a post on this. The short version is special Elon zone. Okay. So like a special economic zone, where you have different regulations, except it's a special Elon zone. Okay. Texas should zone some part of Texas around Starbase where Elon can move at the speed of physics, not permits. Okay. And the reason is that there's this enormous overhang of pre-internet laws. Larry Page actually said every law, has to be re-examined in the presence of the internet, because it just changes so many fundamental assumptions about, obviously about currency, but also about, for example, with product safety, you can scan something and it should be able to tell you every review that anybody's ever had in the world on it, right? Just that alone changed the nature of what regulation is. You don't necessarily need pre-market approval. With a good enough camera, you can get every single review of a device post-market, just as one example of many, okay? So now, on the other hand, that doesn't mean that you need to start totally from scratch. You don't have to rewrite the laws for assault. You don't need to rewrite the laws around graffiti or something like that, right? You just actually need the minimal edits to the laws. For example, if you had a zone where, if you had a zone where human-driven cars were not legal, okay? Only self-driving cars are legal. Think about how that completely changes the topography of that city. That's like cul-de-sac, for example, in Arizona, like a walkable community. Because once you assume self-driving cars exist, you can have like a very green central area. You can have, maybe ugly tunnels or parking lots that the self-driving cars go and, park themselves in. And even the parking can be quite tight because self-driving cars park perfectly, right? Humans make errors. Humans will, crash into each other. They won't always perfectly parallel park. Self-driving cars can do very complex parking arrangement, like ants or whatever, right? So you could have And they could all be underground because it can be like a long, dark tunnel that they go through a single file or whatever, right? The point is self-driving cars can park and store themselves in ways that humans wouldn't tolerate. Humans need to walk up to it and open it, right? So you completely redesign towns, neighborhoods, even cities around the self-driving car. Now, when I say it's one law, actually it's changing quite a few laws because there's quite a few laws on speed limits and there's laws on seat belts and there's laws on this and laws on that, right? Like, should your hands be on the steering wheel? Well, what if there's no steering wheel in the car, right? Like a lot of these laws are predicated on a 20th century gas-powered, human-driven automobile, right? Once you have a different set of laws or a different edit to the laws, you have a totally different zone, okay? So when I say special Elon zone, really what that means is a special economic zone with a recognized founder who has plenary authority to edit those laws. And that authority is given to them by the local government who has some patch of land that they're not doing anything with because there's tons of barren land out there. Tons and tons and tons of it, right? I mean, you ever been to Dubai?
No.
Okay. You should. Okay. Here is my checklist for you. Okay. And I actually think this would be the highest value trip you could take simply to calibrate. Also for anybody in your audience. There's maybe 6 cities that I would say you should probably visit. Maybe 7. Okay. So Warsaw in Poland, just to see how much Eastern Europe has improved. It's far enough away from the Ukrainian war zone that, it's fine. Okay. Dubai, Riyadh.
I went to
Bangalore.
Riyadh last year.
Okay, fine. For FII, maybe?
No, I went for a different event, but I was blown away by, one, how safe I felt.
Yes.
2 is how much my mental preparation for what the Western media had told me about Riyadh, and then the cognitive dissonance of being there and realizing this is nothing like what I had been told it was. And so just like
exactly.
that flip was very eye-opening.
This is the thing is lots of Republicans know that the media has been lying to them about so many things, large and small, about whether men and women even exist. It's just one huge, but the limited example, right? What they haven't put together is that it's also really misrepresenting what's going on abroad. Other countries, one of the issues I think, and this is kind of, I don't hope to convince anybody with this, but I think lots of people in MAGA correctly observe that Democrats brought a lot of legal aliens across the border, but then incorrectly think that means the rest of the world is our enemy. But they're not really. There's billions of people out there just living their lives. The vast majority of people are not flooding into the US or what have you. And also a lot of the media reports on those other countries are incorrect in ways that you'd only be able to understand how they're incorrect if you're on the ground there, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's good that so if you're in Riyadh, so I'd say Warsaw, Dubai, Riyadh, Bangalore, Ho Chi Minh City, Singapore, Shenzhen. Okay. And on the last one, Trump has said he's visiting China. And, I think one of the Trump's sons was recently in Hong Kong. I think Eric Trump was in Hong Kong. So it's okay if Trump is visiting China, it's okay to visit China. I'm not saying you become Chinese or whatever, right? But it is okay to go and travel and simply see what the country is like and just see it with your own eyes and see the scale of their manufacturing plant just to calibrate, right? Because there's some things that can only be understood if you're actually on the ground there. I mean, for example, for me, my parents are from India and I grew up in the US. And in the 80s and 90s, when we visited India, it really was just really desperate poverty, of a shocking variety. And, there were people, it was flies and there was, really poor people all over and the roads were incredibly dirty and on and on and on. Right. Then I was working for a long time in the 2000s. I didn't have that much time to go back. I went back occasionally. And then after a long gap, I went back in the mid-late 2010s and I was stunned at how much everything had improved. I was just agog like this. Okay. like they had 5G internet and the airports were beautiful and the roads were like radically improved. I mean, traffic lights and, all these things you take for granted, but it was all like fresh new blacktop. And there were Hiltons and there were Starbuckses and there was every internet service I could imagine, and on and on and on. There's UPI and all the identity services, all this type of stuff, which I could go through. And I was just like, I honestly just wouldn't have believed it unless I had seen it with my own eyes. Mm-hmm. And I just was not calibrated because I had reasonably, it's like, show me something, bro. Right. People will say something online, but then you actually have to see it. The execution is everything. Right. And the execution of India in the 2010s was just beyond belief for me. So that's when I really started tracking it very, very closely. I can show you graphs and charts. I can show you. You want me to show you a video that I took of an Indian airport? Let me show you one.
Sure. I actually went. I went to India in I think it was 2017, and I went to Mumbai, Goa. I went to Delhi, Agra, Jaipur. I mean, I went to a bunch of different cities. I spent like 2.5 weeks in the country, and it was very interesting to see, not in the country itself, like, hey, these are the places that are undeveloped. And then here are the places that are, 10 years ahead, 15 years ahead. And you could just see like it was sweeping through the country.
It's moving very, very, very fast also. Yeah. And the reason I just say that is even 2017, just think about how much the US has changed in 2017. That's pre-COVID and so on and so forth, right? So I want to just show you this. Here's one from 2023. Just play this video. Yeah, here, let me put this one. Here.
To the chat.
Can you see the screen there?
Oh, here we go. Yep. Pretty nice.
Bangalore, this is quite a few airports in India are like this now, right? Now, I can show you more, kind of visuals and stuff like this. I can show you charts, like here's a chart on infrastructure, for example. And this shows, like, look at the huge increase. That's 2012 and 2021. Look at the number of lights that have come online, right? Or the highway network, look how much denser it is over here, right? Here's airports. There's like, 20, 30% more airports. Here's water connections, like all kinds of stuff like this. Public infrastructure is just going voop like this up and to the right.
Balaji, how much of this is the government just wakes up one day, is like, hey, we got to do this, and they start to fund this stuff, versus it's entrepreneurs who are doing it, or like what's driving the change?
Well, that's the amazing part. It is both, but the thing that is amazing to me is the government is actually very competent there. Modi's government, Prime Minister Modi's government, is actually very, very competent. And there's lots of things that India does, which you can argue is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in the moment, it's like, oh my God, I can't. But on balance, it is 2 steps forward. And the country's just radically improved. Now, the reason I say this is it's important to kind of, I think you can be too far and you can also be too close. What I mean by that is, if you're too far and you've been in, America or, Canada or I don't know, some other place, let's say it's the US, you've just been there your whole life. You've never actually come to India. You'll have some vision of India that's just from the media. Okay, fine. And then if you come there, you'll see all the things that are flawed about it and whatnot. Conversely, if you grow up completely in India, you take for granted the change every single day and it's so gradual, you don't notice it. But if you come back 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, like that, every year or 2 years and so on and so forth for a few weeks or a month, then you have sort of the right frame where you can see the change. Oh, all those buildings went up since the last time I was here. It's not so infrequent that you don't really have a model of it, but it's not so frequent that you take the change for granted. Does that make any sense, right? So that's why I suggest that trip in particular, because here's another way of putting it. I'm not saying, and one thing I want to be very clear about, I'm not saying all of India is amazing or anything like that. I'm not saying that. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of things to fix and so on. But the best analogy I give is India is like California in reverse. Okay, let me explain. So in California, you go through California, there's beautiful old buildings. But everything new is a homeless encampment. It's a safe injection site. It's somebody OD'd on crack or meth or whatever on the side of the road. It's like a burned down building, like, Pacific Palisades, or, it's like a bridge to nowhere, like this $100 billion that they allocated for the train. It didn't build anything, right? So everything new in California in the physical world is a disaster. Even Elon couldn't put a sign. Elon, the most resourceful man in the world, couldn't get a sign up on top of the X.com building and had to take down the sign. Remember that, right? Now, so everything old in California is amazing and beautiful, and everything new is terrible. India is the reverse. Lots of stuff that's old is shanty towns, and it's like filth and so. But everything that's new, it's like an Apple store. It's like a beautiful airport. It's a highway. It's a this. It's a that. Right. So India is getting fractally better, and California is getting fractally worse. Does that make any sense? Right.
Makes
so
complete
both
sense.
of them. Yeah. And so that is a way for me to make sense of it, because if you just take snapshots, people can find all kinds of things that are good and bad about each thing. But the thing is that India and California are converging, or even have converged in ways that I would never, ever have expected when I was growing up. And as I said, I'm a reality shill. I just call it like I see it because I'm a global investor. If I didn't think it was real, I wouldn't, I don't see an opportunity in, I don't know, Bolivia or something like that. But if I did, I would pay more attention to it. I think they're adopting Tether now. Did you see that?
I did see.
Yeah. It's like the currency. That's the last I heard of Bolivia. Nothing against Bolivia. I just not on my radar. Maybe there's something happening there. Anyway, my point is, I would prefer to, I'm in Singapore, I'm in the special economic zone now. And yes, I would still take Singapore over Bangalore, but I would definitely take Bangalore over LA.
Today's episode is brought to you by Simple Mining. Have you ever been interested in mining Bitcoin? As a miner myself, I've been using Simple Mining for the past few months, and the experience has been nothing short of seamless. I mine with the pool of my choice, and the Bitcoin is sent directly to my wallet. Simple Mining, which is based in Cedar Falls, Iowa, offers a premium white glove service designed for everyone, from individual enthusiasts to large-scale miners. They've been in business for 4 years and currently operate more than 20,000 Bitcoin miners, including mine. Their electricity is over 65% renewable thanks to the abundance of wind energy. Not only do they simplify mining with their top-notch hosting and on-site repair services, but they also help you benefit financially by running your operations as a business. This approach offers 100% bonus depreciation to optimize the profitability of your investment. Do you ever worry about the completion of maintaining your mining equipment? They've got you covered there too. For the first 12 months, all repairs are included at no extra cost. If you experience any downtime, they'll credit you for it as well. And if your miners aren't profitable at the amount, simply pause them with no penalties. When you're ready to upgrade or adjust your setup, their exclusive marketplace provides a seamless way to resell your equipment. Join me and many satisfied miners who have simplified their Bitcoin mining journey. You can even get started today with the 7-day miner trial. Visit simplemining.io/pomp to get started today. That's simplemining.io/pomp to get started today. With Simple Mining, they make it simple. Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask this question. We've seen this multipolar world where you've got the US kind of on one side, you've got China and Russia, I think have kind of been on the other side. And India, to me, was it's kind of like a tip off of an NBA game. Yeah, they we throw the ball up, like who's going to get it? There's been viral videos and photos in the last couple of weeks of the three leaders of those countries outside the United States all hanging out, having fun, kind of look like they're getting pretty chummy with each other. But also I think that, Trump and Modi and the US India relationship is still strong and seems to be positive as well. China, to me, feels like the part of the conversation, though, that usually gets left out when people are talking about the geopolitical landscape, because they want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine stuff. They want to talk about the fact that Russia's sending the oil to China and then China selling it to the rest of the world, whatever. But India never stopped buying oil from Russia. India never stopped buying wheat. India said, hey, we got to look out for our people. We got to do what the right thing is here. We got to be able to build this infrastructure. Like, they took a very nationalist approach, I think, to a lot of things over the last 5 years or so. And so,
yeah. So,
what happens if India says, you know what, actually, hey, US, we're going to go the other way. Like, we'll still be friends, but actually we're going to align ourselves with Russia and China.
Well, I want to show you something, which is actually maybe you may not see the immediate relevance, but I'm going to show you something which I think is very, very important graph with respect to that. Okay. Do you see this?
Yep. Bin Laden's compound.
Okay, this is a map. Okay. When Osama bin Laden was found, he was found in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And his compound was literally down the street from the Pakistan Military Academy over here. Do you see that? And you know how like Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, right? India should really rename Pakistan to Bin Ladenistan. Okay. Simply to remind Americans that they're sending billions to Bin Ladenistan. Right? The country that harbored the guy that killed 3,000 Americans and probably a lot more international terrorists, right? In fact, they've launched terrorist attacks in India. Obviously they were harboring, look, it's right next door to Afghanistan, so there's a very porous border there. That's not a real border in many ways, right? And so, look, there's many individual Pakistanis who are really great people and they're good at math and so on and so forth. I have no beef. There's lots of great Pakistanis, but the regime has basically been like a terrorist regime. And so the reason I bring that up is America is doing something that's seen by India as ridiculously hostile, which is funding this terrorist state on India's border that launched the Mumbai attacks, that constantly, because Pakistan doesn't have economic growth. It's not like Dubai or Riyadh, right? Which has, there's Muslim majority countries that have very friendly relations with India. Like the UAE has, a giant Hindu temple, and India's on great terms with them, and Hindus and Muslims can work together well. And, so Saudi Arabia, much of the Gulf Coast countries and Indians work together really well, right? But Pakistan is just this kind of cuckoo, kind of state. They don't have economic growth, so they keep launching terrorist attacks in India. And here's the thing, both the US and China fund Pakistan. Okay. So China funds them to try to keep India in check, and the US funds them for God only knows what reasons, maybe for like a military base or something near Afghanistan. But clearly this is billions for Bin Ladenistan, right? So when you think about that, that's why India is a swing vote, because now, I don't think most Americans are aware of that, how much money has gone to Pakistan, how many soldiers have gone there. It would be, I don't know, it would be the equivalent of funding like MS-13 on America's border. It would be an extremely hostile act, right? And despite that, Indians still want to, because, Indians speak English and there's lots of Indian Americans. And I broadly think, I understand, it's funny for me to put it this way. I think MAGA's in a phase right now where they're kind of lashing out at everybody. But I think in the long term, like a 10-year time frame, and I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But I think over the long run, we're going to see, for lack of a term, let's call it the Indo-European world.
What is that?
But the Indo-European world is basically India and Indians become an equal to Europeans and Americans and so on. A rough example of this is, in the 1800s, prior to the 1800s, the Jewish community was not emancipated. That is to say, you can argue this, they were emancipated in France and so on. That meant they didn't have the rights as citizens. So, for example, the Jewish community in any kingdom, they would pay taxes as a group. It's like a corporation. They wouldn't be able to pay taxes as individuals, right? So they couldn't hold property, they couldn't vote, they couldn't marry, and so on and so forth. They had to be within their own community and so on. Okay. But then when they were emancipated, they could connect peer to peer. And then suddenly they rose very quickly, and they just hadn't been that big a force in Europe prior to the 1800s. And suddenly they just kind of came out of nowhere, all these really smart people leveling up in the professions and so on. And then there was a huge amount of consternation over, who are these people coming from? I can't believe they're taking our jobs and so on. And they're working on weekends. The Sunday law firms didn't want to work on weekends. And there was a lot of consternation about that in the early 1900s, and many different reactions from all sides. But eventually, after simplifying an enormous 20th century with obviously the Germans and that whole thing, right? But simplifying an enormous 20th century, the Jewish community proved itself, right? They proved that they could do math, they could do computer science, they could found their own companies, they could execute, right? They could found their own countries, right? And there were left-wing versions, there were right-wing versions, there were centrist versions, that's a whole topic, right? The analogy today is, if you go back further in time, obviously the Jewish community had thousands of years of history, right? going all millennia, right? So there's some evidence of them having staying power, some talent there that then, right? And so in the same way, Indians, and India is a huge, huge, huge place. So many different kinds of Indians and so on and so forth, many different, subgroups and what have you. But it's comparable because until the last, few decades, most Indians were basically in India. Just like, the Jewish community, something, if you've heard the term the shtetl.
No, what is that?
That's like the area in Eastern Europe, Poland, where it was like the ghetto where many Jewish people lived and so forth. So a similar kind of thing in India was the Kalapani. It was essentially this belief that the black water surrounded India. And if you left India, you went overseas, then you wouldn't get reincarnated. Okay. So it's a belief that kept Indians sort of region locked there. Okay. Similar to how the Jewish community was in the shtetl. And in the modern era, just like, Orthodox Jews shaved their beards and they assimilated and then they leveled up in a huge way. Only in the last 20, 30, 40 something years has even a small number of Indians actually, in a sense, entered the modern world. And that's like, the 7 million or so Indian Americans and what have you. And they've done, I think pretty well. But like in many ways, they're kind of the advanced scouts because, why Sundar and Satya, why are they CEOs of Google and Microsoft? Well, they actually had to start as H-1Bs because they weren't starting as citizens. They had to start as employees. Their children are like unlocked phones, right? Because they have the full rights of citizens. And so it's a good analogy, right? Like locked versus unlocked. So if you're an Indian immigrant, you have to join a mega corporation and say, sir, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir, and work your way up, right? But if you're one of their children, you're unlocked and you can do, you have more security in what you can do. So then you can be a founder, right? So lots of the new generation of tech founders are of Indian descent. Anyway, what's my point? I can show you, actually, you know what? Let me just calibrate just because I'm saying this stuff, but I want to calibrate. So you can see I'm not just totally crazy person. Only partially crazy. Haha. Okay. Okay. So can you see the screen there?
Yep.
Okay. So in lots of graphs look like this. Yep. Okay. Where China's just dominating the entire world. Okay. But if you zoom in closer on this graph and do the world minus China,
India's above the US.
Yes. India is a distant but real number 2 on many of these graphs. And crucially, look at the growth there. That's real growth, right? So that's steel. Okay, let me show you another one. Here's nuclear. Okay, so this is, the white boxes are proposed, gray is planned, and then red is under construction. So China has the world's largest nuclear build out, but India is actually number 2. Right? It's a distant number 2, but it's a real number 2, right? Russia's number 3 over there. Okay. The US unfortunately has at the time this was made, no new nuclear power plants under construction. There's a new regulation that the Trump administration promulgated that maybe we'll see something, but I'm just saying at the time this was made, right? Okay. Then here is electricity generation, and the same graph we saw before where China's just crushing everybody. But look there. India is actually going to flip the EU soon. Right? I mean, the EU is doing all the stupid degrowth stuff. They're hurting themselves. Still, for India to flip the EU, that's not nothing. That's a real, look at this graph. That's a healthy growth rate there, right? I'll do a few more. Smartphones. India's gone from about 1% to actually making 20% of global phones. It's now the second largest producer in the world. It's still a distant number 2 after China, but 20% it's not nothing, And then cement, okay? China's number 1, again, by far. But India's a healthy number 2 and 4x the United States.
I mean, it is pretty crazy to think about the fact that India is number 2. And I guess the question then becomes, is it because they have so many people? Is it because of the economic policies? Is it because actually there's an entrepreneurial energy that isn't met with all of the regulation and kind of like headwinds that the United States has? Like, why do you think India is number 2?
What I'm saying, basically, my case I would make is we're not total losers. we like some Indians can play, right? And I think that on the other side of the next 10 years and so, Indians and India will prove themselves that actually they can do stuff in the physical world. They can code, they can do math and so on and so forth, and prove themselves as a peer in much the same way the Jewish community did in the 1900s, if that makes any sense. But the reason there's a lot of shock on that right now is there's kind of the reaction of who are these guys? Where'd they all come from? Why is everybody suddenly named Vivek and this, that, and the other? It's like it was one thing when there's like one or two of them, but now there's so many everywhere. What's going on? This is our country. And so I get that. Totally get where that comes from, right? And so now that brings to the thing about, Trump and India and so on and so forth. So one thing that happened in 2015 was the trade war, right? And actually, in some ways, let me show you a couple of graphs. This is my mental model of the world. There are two things that happened in the early 2010s, late 2000s. Okay. The first is this graph. Do you see this one where it shows Google and Facebook just going vertical and newspaper revenue just cratering to 16 billion, right? So that's a drop of, more than 75% basically in a few years from 60 something billion to about 15, less on the order of 15 billion, right? Maybe you can say 20 billion. Okay. That is the internet disrupting blue America. Okay. The other graph is this one where it shows, so that's internet disrupting Democrats. And this graph shows right around the same time, China disrupting Republicans. Mm-hmm. Okay. So once you see that, you actually realize, oh, this is actually a 4-faction conflict. The internet, Democrats, Republicans, and China. As the Democrat pie shrank, go broke, go woke, this is what radicalized them. Mm-hmm. They lost a lot of money. Suddenly, their lifestyle changed from writing 4 or 5 or 6 articles a year for Time magazine to having to write an article every day for some, gossip outlet. Their lifestyle, eroded, and these tech guys got rich. So they got really mad at us and they started the tech lash, but they also started wokeness to take some share from Red because they got desperate. Red was at the same time being attacked by China economically. And so Red basically fought back against Blue with Trump and fought back against China with the trade war. Okay, so you had this 4-faction thing. Blue is fighting the internet with the tech lash. Blue is fighting Red with wokeness. Red is fighting Blue with Trump. And Red is fighting China with the trade war. With me so far? Okay. So if we just focus, though, on that second theater, or, it's really 4 theaters, but if we focus on the Republicans versus China, this is why Trump was saying China, 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 China in 2015 when it wasn't on the radar of blue Americans because red Americans were feeling the competition. With me so far?
Yep.
Okay. So what happened? China at first was completely taken aback by what Trump did because, for example, he managed to completely crater a graph. There's a graph showing Chinese FDI into the US, and it just went kaput after, so this one, look at this graph.
It just completely fell off a cliff.
It completely fell off a cliff because this was the Trump effect, right? So Trump essentially, this thing was just going absolutely vertical. And so Trump essentially just cratered China's ability to invest directly in the US. Okay.
The other thing that happened here, just as a real world anecdote, is in the early 2010s in New York City, there was tons of foreign buyers of real estate. They were buying apartments and especially luxury apartments, et cetera. As that capital flooded into the market, builders in New York City said, oh, wow, look at all these Chinese buyers. Let's go build a lot more apartments to feed that demand. And then what was very interesting is you don't just snap your fingers and build a tower in New York City. It takes a number of years. So as
all these guys got wrecked, basically.
In the 2018 timeframe, a bunch of that supply came online. And this chart, one of the parts that I remember talking to some of the real estate guys when this was happening, is China also put a lot of capital controls in place because they saw that people were getting the money out and going and buying US real estate, whatever. And so now all of a sudden, you basically have a bunch of supply coming online, no foreign demand coming in for it. And so now you got real estate developers that are like, well, I thought those foreign buyers were going to be the market. And so for a period there was a lot more supply than there was demand, which meant that rents were kept at an affordable rate, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward 7 years or so to today, completely different story. And guess what? Rents are through the roof, all-time highs in New York City, complete mess. And there's this feeling of, hey, foreigners are taking, the apartments, there's rent control. I mean, it's just a complete, very complex, but very, very big mess. But 7 years ago, it was the exact opposite, where there was tons of supply coming online and that foreign demand wasn't actually there.
Yeah. So basically at that time, the Chinese and the real estate developers lost their shirts, and that kept the growth in rent somewhat, not elevated. It meant it couldn't
suppressed
go to the.
Yeah, it got suppressed.
Yeah, somewhat suppressed. That's right. But though the structural factor that's boosting rent is the Fed buying mortgage-backed securities by printing, diluting everybody down, and then taxing you twice or thrice, because you've got the income tax and the corporate tax, but it's also the inflation tax. And then it bids against you in the market with the money it just taxed away from you with inflation, right? But I want to share a second graph, okay? And then I'll get to my point on India. So this graph shows how China reacted to the trade war, right? Essentially, at first they were shocked by it because they just didn't expect that to happen. That came out of completely left field, that, all of these investments suddenly got marked down. Suddenly China became America's enemy. What? This is now 10 years ago. So you have to remember that time period. But I don't know if you and I are roughly comparable age, but if you remember the 2000s or even the early 2010s, it was very common for Goldman and Morgan type people to say, oh yeah, China will become the world's largest economy and so on. But they'd say it in a casual way because it was so far off that it wasn't like something that someone said, you traitor, I hate you so much, why are you a CCP agent? They didn't say it like that, right? Because they were just it was like an abstract observation of someday.
Of trends. They just looked at the trend line and extrapolated it.
Yes, but it was so far in the future that nobody considered it a serious threat. Mm-hmm. After China suddenly flipped U.S. manufacturing, then suddenly people started reacting in a very different way to these projections, because now objects in mirror are closer than they appear, the thing they say on, right? So China was totally taken aback since the sentiment shifted very radically against them. And what did they do? So they actually reacted by radically expanding their share in other markets and reducing their share in the US. So now, as of 2022, North America was down to 16% of China's revenue. Mm-hmm. It used to be a much, much larger share. Okay. And they've intentionally been moving away from the US as a market. That's actually 2022, which is already 3 years ago, and things are moving. It's like saying, where is AI in 2022? This stuff moves really, really, really fast, right? And so the point being that the way that China reacted to the cutoff of US markets for its trade was to find other markets. Mm-hmm. And it just basically proved itself. What do I mean by proved itself? It's like, if a venture capitalist says no to you on a deal, then what do? Do you cry? Some people cry and they die and they give up. Other people are like, okay, well, I'm just going to find somebody else, and I'll find somebody else, and I'll find somebody else, and get the deal done without that person, right? And so essentially America's bet was China was weak and couldn't actually really survive with that. And still people think that it's very dependent on US demand and they're the consumer of last resort. That's a very outdated model of the world. When things are changing really fast, did I give you my fastball analogy?
No.
It's like, if you've got a ball and it's rolling slowly across the ground and you look at it and you look away and you look back, it's basically in the same place that it was. But if someone's pitching a fastball and you look away for even a second, it's in a totally different place, a second later. So when things are moving really fast, like China relative to the US or Chinese markets, you can't rely on some outdated media image in your head from the 2010s of what China is. You have to intentionally go and refresh today. Does that make it? It's like imagine if your picture of AI was from 2010. Obviously it'd be wildly out of date. That thing is moving so fast, right? The difference is the AI stuff comes to you in your feed, but the China stuff or other stuff won't unless you actually go and seek it out. Okay, what's my point? Putting it all together. The TLDR is China diversified away from the US as a market for its trade. And India and Indians are going to have to, for about 10 years, diversify away from the US as a market for talent. That's to say, one of the things, I wrote this long post on this, but I don't believe that you should go anywhere that you're not welcome. And I also think for other reasons, the US is going to have a lot of infighting for the years to come. There's blue versus red just keeps amping up and so on and so forth. At the same time, India itself is doing really well. Indians are doing really well on the internet, which is pure crypto and other kinds of stuff. And finally, there's actually dozens of countries with digital nomad programs. So, for example, if you look at this graph over here, the war for talent, basically, you see this, countries offering digital nomad visas?
Yep.
So El Salvador, Mexico, Cyprus, Greece, all of these countries offer digital nomad visas, right? And the UAE in particular, and also, Malaysia/Singapore are very, very friendly to Indians and more generally anybody around the world. But the reason is, as the US has, in my view, incorrectly, but I understand why, as the US has decided that it doesn't want these tech guys, dozens of other countries have decided we need tech guys. We want these people because these are the highest earning mobile capital in the world. And if you can build a tech cluster, that leads to compounding economic growth. So you actually want to recruit them and attract them to your country. And the thing is, of course, everything's a balance, right? Whenever you say something like that, people will always take it into some extreme direction, one way or the other. They'll say, what, you hate the country, you want to flood it with foreigners? No, we're a country, not an economic zone or something. Or they'll flip to the other extreme and they want just totally open borders, right? But, for example, Dubai and Singapore showed that you can have, it's like saying hire no one or hire everyone. Obviously, you want to be selective in your hiring. Duh. And also, depending on what kind of company you are, you hire some people and others, and maybe you have a hiring freeze at times, and maybe you go on a hiring spurt at other times, right? So, and then by the way, the other flip side of it is exporting. Like, just like you can export trade, you can export talent. The funny thing is, by the way, a lot of Americans don't think about this, but much of the world, okay, so there's a term that people will sometimes use that I'm going to repurpose in a certain way, okay? Much of the world is actually American-occupied government. Okay, why do I say that? For example, do you know what the Harvard Kennedy School is?
Yes.
Okay, so the Harvard Kennedy School alone, do you know how many heads of state it's trained?
Oh, it's like some crazy number. It's like a factory, basically.
It's a factory for cranking out heads of other countries, right? So here's like an example. Just this one school alone, President of Mexico, President of Mongolia, Prime Minister of Somalia, Prime Minister of Singapore, President of Ecuador, President of Costa Rica, blah, 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 government administrators. This is just like one list. Look at how many administrators there are just on this list, elected federal officials. And go ahead.
No, it's just hilarious when you pull it up and you start scrolling through. It is literally a factory. This episode is brought to you by BitLayer. BitLayer is taking Bitcoin beyond just a store of value. For the first time, you can put your Bitcoin to work, earning yield while staying true to its core principles of security and decentralization. BitLayer is making Bitcoin DeFi a reality. Learn more at x.com/BitLayerLabs. Again, that's x.com/BitLayerLabs.
It is a factory that cranks out heads of states that are not in the United States. Many of them, some are and some are not, right? And, like royalty, right? They've got some of these people are in the US, but a lot of them are just global, right? And that is just one school, okay? And if you add it up and you say, how many foreign heads of state, how many foreign bureaucrats, either they trained, they got their education in the US or their children are in the US, how many American multinationals like Starbucks, McDonald's, and so on are there overseas? How many foreign entrepreneurs raise capital in the US or go public on the US stock market? Even Alibaba went public in the United States. I mean, of all things, right? How many, there's something called harmonization, which is where US regulations are used in other countries. They export regulations just like you could export a product. Why do people want to do that? Well, the FDA wants its laws to be used or regulations to be used by everybody, but also Pfizer and Merck want that as well. You know why?
It's probably cheaper
because then they can get exactly. They get approval in the US and then the same laws or regulations apply everywhere else. They can just export it everywhere. Mm-hmm. It does make sense, right? But the problem is,
it's like standardization. They basically want standardized rules across the world if they could get it.
Yes. And there's a reason. You have to be able to defend something before you can critique it. There's a reasonableness to that. The unreasonableness is if the FDA messes up and it's not accountable to either electoral or market correction. It can't be voted out, and it also can't go out of business in a normal way. So one person, an unelected person, who can't be fired and isn't even known to you in Silver Spring, Maryland, can chokehold all global biotechnology in any space. It's like Gensler, but invisible. Okay. All right. Well, putting that all together, my point is, much of the world actually has Americans exported there. American companies, American regulators, American bureaucrats, American trained this and that. And that wasn't a completely negative sum thing. It was a positive sum thing for both Americans and for those other countries that built the greatest empire the world has ever seen. There's a lot of good to that. That's a country that we both grew up in, right? And when people say the word empire, they often, one of the things that happened is American empire, unlike the British Empire, spent a lot of effort on invisibility, right? So British Empire called itself an empire, and then everybody's like, I'm declaring my independence from Britain. The American empire never called itself an empire, but have you seen the map of 750 military bases around the world, right? Obviously, just not to be too thing about it, but this is not the posture. Let me put this on screen. Okay, can you see that map?
Yep.
Oops. Where is it? This one. Yeah. Okay. This is not the posture of a people that just wants to humbly sit behind its borders. Okay?
All the red dots are bases.
Yeah, exactly. MAGA should just understand what America is. It is the greatest empire of all time. Of all time, right? Not even the British Empire had, there was a period in the 90s, the 2000s, even early 2010s, where all the Russians and Chinese were sending their best guys to the US. Even the nominally sovereign enemies or whatever, Russia was part of the G8. China was just essentially, basically just a very quiet back end. They even took the bombing. Their embassy in Belgrade got blown up. They didn't say anything, it was just the most dominant empire of all time. And the reason I say that is clearly Americans emigrated around the world to build that. Mm-hmm. American emigration, Americans sending bodies, sending people, sending businesses. Unless you're saying everything America did was bad, Americans sent a lot of people around the world, and that actually did a lot of good, in my view. There's a lot of good stuff that came out of that, right? So why did I say that? Because Indians are going to be doing that. Indians are doing that. They are sending a lot of people around the world. And as I showed, India's actually number 2 in nuclear plants. India's number 2 in steel. There's a lot of graphs. The problem with this is if you don't say anything, Indians are now, for some, one way of putting it is China kind of started modernizing in 1978 with Deng Xiaoping taking over. And they had about a 37-year honeymoon until 2015, 2016, let's say 38-year honeymoon, 37, 38, until 2016 when Trump took over, and then China became public enemy number 1, right? India started liberalizing, many of your viewers may not know this, but 1991. When Soviet communism fell, 2 other things also happened. Capitalism got legalized on the internet, because until that point, you couldn't do .coms, you couldn't take payments on the internet and so on. The NSF acceptable use policy prevented that. It only allowed academic and government use. The other thing that happened is that India liberalized. It went away from socialism towards capitalism. So now, about 35 years later, 2026, almost exactly the same period, China had 38 years. India had 35 years of kind of growing before suddenly there was a reaction to it where this thing is getting too big for its britches. Does that make any sense, right? This is one perspective on it, right? And so China, the thing is, you can only grow to a certain point within the system, and then you have to become the system. Mm-hmm. You have to actually, because the system will say, okay, it's kind of like, Zynga, the company Zynga?
Yeah, gaming company.
A long time ago, they were gaining so many users on Facebook that Zuck was like, you know what? I don't really like that. And so he just hit a bunch of buttons and they just fell through a trapdoor because they were very dependent on the platform, right? And that's when a product and a platform come into conflict. Sometimes the platform wins because it can just push a bunch of buttons and the product gets, just gets goes into a black hole.
Yeah, disappears.
Yeah. But sometimes that product becomes strong enough that it can build its own platform. For example, when Facebook was initially growing, a lot of its growth came from Gmail. And eventually, Google was torn about whether to allow that for a long time. Because obviously people have a right to send and receive their own emails, and how can they block us from doing, block our users from doing what they want and so on. And eventually somebody made the strategic decision to say, no, Facebook can't do that. But too late, Facebook already had 500 million users. It had its own platform. Make sense, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a very common thing we see in tech, where when the product and the platform compete, the product becomes too big for its britches, because nobody cares. Facebook doesn't care if it has 1 million users. When it has 100 million users, it cares, right? So now India, Americans care about India. Nobody, if India was actually a third world shithole country, blah, 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 nobody would care.
Yep.
Does anybody care about, I won't name any other country that is in that position now because they might be unfortunate, but the Scott Adams concept of Elbonia, right? Which is a fictional country. Why did Peter Navarro, why would he make such a big thing about India can't buy Russian oil? If it wasn't a player.
No, it's definitely
if it wasn't a player, would it be worth yelling at?
No, it's definitely, Balaji, it's definitely a player. Yeah. I want to switch topics real quick because we got to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about network school.
Of course. Yeah.
Bitcoin, gold, dollar. Those three things seem to be in this centrifuge being tossed all around the world. Central banks are, they're holding treasuries in dollars, then they're buying up a lot of gold. People want them to buy Bitcoin. You see the Bitcoiners online, they've got views on gold and dollars. The dollar holders, they have views on gold and Bitcoin. I mean, it's just those three assets are married together.
Absolutely.
I keep saying that we're entering what I call a crazy uncle market, which is when you sit down to Thanksgiving, dinner, and your crazy uncle says, gold, Bitcoin, guns, and land. Those are the four things, right? Probably going to do pretty well. But how do you look at the gold, Bitcoin stuff?
Can I give so I will half agree with you and half really disagree with you.
All right, perfect.
So, all right. So first of all, I love the crazy uncle thing. It's very, very, very funny. I would say, so gold and Bitcoin, yes. Here's why I would be lukewarm to negative on guns and land.
Okay.
At least within the West. The reason is, I think what you'd substitute there is passport. Second passport. Okay. The reason, here's my argument as follows. First, stipulating that I'm friendly to the Second Amendment. I understand why it exists, and it's not simply self-defense against a crime. It's to overthrow a bad government, and the tree of liberty is watered from time to time with the blood of tyrants. I understand all that stuff. I'm not, okay. With that said, using a gun is very much a last resort. Especially in modern America, where you can get Rittenhoused for that, right? The process is the punishment, and you're dragged through this Kafkaesque thing, and Rittenhouse wins by one juror's sympathy on one day. It's a very, very close run thing. And, Daniel Penny is also just I
was just going to say, Daniel Penny is the exact same thing. One person basically said, I ain't doing this.
Yeah, that's right. But he, was dragged through the mud for, he almost went to jail for the rest of his life, right? And so the problem is that if you need to, the whole try that in a small town thing, that song and so on and so forth. If you need to whip out a gun, that actually means the state has failed.
Yeah. Oh, I don't say gun. By the way, I don't say gun in terms of to use the gun.
Self-defense.
I say it from the perspective
you mean as
of
investment.
Ammunition prices go up in 2010 and in 2020.
Sure.
So as we head towards uncertainty, you get it's almost people perceive the thing that they may need, so they start to buy it before they need it. Markets are forward looking, but then
I know. Okay,
we always somehow sidestep. They don't actually need the gun. It's just that the ammunition prices all significantly go up.
Totally understood. So okay, fine. So let's just say at least. What I think, just to close that out and merge the two things together, I think there's, and bear with me because I'll give one or two remarks and then go to the next. There's a left-wing version of abolish the police, which is totally crazy. There's the Republican version of Second Amendment, I'll defend myself with my gun. Then there's a tech guy version of I will get a private security force like Uber for private security and so on and so forth, right? But the problem with actually all three of those is that there isn't such really a thing as private security. There's only public security. The reason is unless you're Trump, your private security detail cannot go ahead of you and like clear buildings and clear snipers and throw people in jail and so on and so forth. It can just be a bunch of guys that like surround you or something and look big on the sidewalk, right? You don't really have the ability to clear the streets, right? Only there's no such thing as private security, only public security. If you keep that in mind, then you actually go from guns and land to a passport to a country that actually has a stable government. So I'd say passport and community would be my number 3 and number 4, right? So that's on the 4th thing, land. So think about the Pacific Palisades, right? That fire that burned down California. What was the market price, the nominal price of those houses a few days before that fire? It was like whatever millions of dollars, right? But if you look closer, you would see that they were not priced properly. Why? Because California hadn't, like insurance companies, for example, wouldn't be able to insure those properties, right? California was still charging property taxes on these exorbitant, houses, but insurance, which was a private actor, was the clue that these things actually were not, there are too many fires, that these guys who are paid to do this kind of risk calculation couldn't make the numbers work anymore. So they just got out. Okay. Obviously that's not limited to the Pacific Palisades. That's a huge swaths of California real estate. And when you have real estate is dependent on the state. If you've got, to give you a few more examples, the squatters in New York, like there's crazy squatter laws. Have you followed this at all? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So if you're a real estate guy, like, the same kind of thing that allows a homeless drug addict, to pass out in the stoop of your shop, right? And you can't remove them. It's only one step further for them to do it in your garage, right? Or they're squatting in your house when you've gone on vacation and there's like squatters' rights, this insane thing that people only realize when they get through this Kafka system where the state is a failure. And so much of it just depends upon like large numbers of people not realizing that there's squatters' rights, right? If you had flash mobs that went around and tried this in states that had, quote, squatters' rights or cities that didn't enforce evictions, you just have a total disaster where you don't actually own, as a landlord or a real estate developer, the property that you think you do. Again, I'm not saying anything as a real estate guy, what I'm talking about, right? But you start stacking it up. It's abolish the police. It's a lack of insurance in lots of blue cities. It's the squatters' rights, it's the homeless encampments. So I don't believe in land unless you believe in the government, which is guarding that land. I'll give you one more example. London. Okay. So London, as you may recall, Russia used to be part of the G8, right? For a while, it looked like it was integrating with the West. Similar to that China graph, lots of Russians had apartments and lives in London and so on and so forth. Lots of other people from lots of different countries did. They thought, as you were saying, that land was like a safe kind of thing, and then suddenly even if they didn't agree with Putin's war, even if they had left Russia 20 years ago, even if they were like fluent in English and blah, 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 they were suddenly punished for being Russian nationals through literally they didn't order the war. They didn't have anything to do with it, right? And their property was seized, or there were sanctions put on them, or banks wouldn't serve them, and so on and so forth. And suddenly realized, wait a second, that thing I thought was secure, that land was actually not secure. And so actually that's why London prices have actually fallen a lot, similar to that thing that would happen with the Chinese overseas developers, right? That you mentioned. So I believe, now then let's get to your first point with gold. Gold, physical bricks of gold. It's funny. I actually don't think the TSA detectors do much of what they are intended to do, but they do have a possibly intended, possibly unintended side effect, which is it's really hard to get a gold bar through a TSA detector. And actually there's also some kind of thing which says like, if you have more than $10,000 on your person, then you have to declare it. Yeah, exactly. Right. So the state is set up to interdict flows of gold, like physical gold. And then if you've got GLD, like the Speeder Trust or something like that, nothing against them. But in my view, that defeats the point of gold because you've got the counterparty risk, right? The whole point of gold is like a physical gold brick, right? So if you're a government, you can afford the armored cars. And even then, like Germany, it cost them a lot of money to get their gold bricks back from the US back to Germany. Did you see that thing?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah,
It took them like 7 years and like millions of dollars. And somebody pointed out they could have done that with one Bitcoin transaction for like a fraction of the cost, fraction of the time, right? So that brings us to number 2. So of gold, digital gold, guns, and land, I would say gold only if you're a government, physical and only physical gold. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, absolutely. Second passport, and find a good community. So second passport, one thing that's not being tracked by a lot of people, Caribbean passports, for example, have doubled in price. Do you know that?
I've been paying attention. There's this company, Bit Citizenship, and
Citizenship.
Yeah, Citizenship, and they you basically can invest in these funds, but they're only doing it in Portugal and Italy, I think. But there's tons of countries now that are introducing these programs that seem to one, the price keeps going up, but two, the volume keeps going up. It's like
the volume. Yes.
One of the
so it's both price and yet demand.
Yeah, one of the charts that always blows my mind is in 20, I think it was 18, when we put the tariffs on China-made solar panels in the U.S. If you look at the demand chart and the adoption chart, there is no change. But whatever, 25% tariff, I think it started with, and it just kept like the demand was so strong, it was basically complete price elasticity. Like people are just like, whatever you charge, I'm buying. Same thing with these passports.
That's right. And the way I think about it, actually, there's Citizenship, there's Citizen X, and there's Henley Global. So just disclosure, I was a seed investor in two of them, and I'm friendly with the Henley people, but I want to see a bunch of these kinds of services because I think there's going to be a lot of demand for it. I think people are going to save up not for their first house, but their second passport. Okay. I think that's actually more valuable because it will exit and being able to move. Because there's the thing is, there's actually two major, this insight is not original to me, but I think it's an important one. There's two major ways that human beings operate. The first way is one that's familiar to us, which is like the farmer, soldier, sedentary. You live in a in a state, and it's almost like imagine you had like a spring or a wire on the back of your neck, like a stretchy cord. You know, like those stretchy cords they've got at the gym and so on, right? So imagine you had something like that, and and there's like a peg in the middle of Nebraska or something like that. And so you could travel around the world as an American. You could be here for 30 days or 90 days or whatever, but it's a stretchy peg that boing, pulls you back, right? You're sort of like anchored to that point. You can't really go too far away. You have to come back to your zone. And if you have a bad passport, like from a country that doesn't have a good passport, then your stretchy kind of thing can't even go that far. There's a great site called passportindex.org where you can look at this, okay? And I think this is going to be a big deal for people. I've got a talk coming up, which is crypto identity is the next big piece of the puzzle after cryptocurrency. It's not just what do you leave the house with? You leave your house with your wallet, keys, and ID, and the wallet part and the private keys part and the ID part all become your cryptocurrency and crypto identity, all one thing, like ENS and so on, like that. Okay. So rather than the first house, get the second passport, save up for that, because I think it's going to unlock more opportunity globally. And, you're only seeing that right now if you're like a digital nomad, but the cost of living is so much less outside the West in many cases that you can live on $1,000 a month. For example, we've got at Network School at ns.com, check it out. Come to ns.com, apply. Okay, fine. But if you come to Network School, we've got down to $1,500 a month all in for gym, co-working, fitness, coffee, this, that, and the other. Because
wait, Balaji, explain.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are going to watch this who have no clue what Network School is. And it's very cool what you guys are doing. So describe like what is Network School and then this $1,500 a month and what they're getting.
Sure. So if you go to ns.com, you can see what Network School is. Briefly, it is just like we started new currencies, we're starting new communities. So we've got an island in the Singapore, Malaysia Special Economic Zone. It's right off the coast of Singapore. And we've got lots and lots of empty apartments. We built a gym. We built San Francisco style cafe and co-working space and an auditorium and lots of event rooms for people to hold talks and lectures and so on and so forth. And we have all different kinds of guest speakers and people from more than 100 countries have come. It's basically like San Francisco outside San Francisco, but like 1/10 the price and so on over here. And so that's like one way of understanding. It's a place to hold. Actually, I can put it on screen. Let me just do that. So Network School is Startup Society. So can you see the video or the visuals there?
Yep.
Yeah. So people are coming off the bus, coming in, checking in, and there's VR and drones. And there's, like a virtual reality flag and so on. There's Vitalik, Brian Johnson. It's a drone shot of the outside, Bitcoin, and, like lectures, content studio over here. This is one of our auditoriums. Robot dogs. Just fun stuff. That's a founder of Flexport. That's a Jesse Pollock of Coinbase Base. And it's just like this is our big gym over here.
It's huge.
Group workouts in the morning. It's very solid commercial gym, right? And that's Jason Calacanis and me. Yoga studio. It's friendly for kids also. And it's just like, basically we've got this gigantic solar punk island, mostly to ourselves, with all kinds of empty apartments here, right? And, people play chess. It's just kind of cool. It's like if you actually had a small town that was actually, tech central, right? Mm-hmm. There's some of the nightlife and so on. People hang out. There's a cafe, and we'll see, bonfire and stuff, beach parties. There's a beach there. So yeah, here's like a drone shot of part of the island, right? So that is ns.com, right? And so that is my constructive solution, right? Rather than, complaining about the world or what have you, it's useful to form a critique of the world as it exists, but ultimately you want to execute on building an alternative, right? Because the best form of criticism is not to simply say that sucks, but rather, here is a better version that I think works. And it's actually much harder to do that. It's way easier to say something sucks than to build something better. The saying Windows sucks is easy. Saying building Linux is hard. But I think we're actually doing it. And importantly, and the reason I call it network school, there's several reasons. One is it's a play on network state. Have your viewers heard about network state? I'll put that on screen just for a second as a refresher. So I wrote this book in 2022 called The Network State. And it's a Wall Street Journal bestseller and so on and so forth. And I can explain what it's about in really one image, which is this. Let me maximize that. So essentially, this is what a network state is. It is just like Bitcoin's a decentralized currency, a network state's a decentralized country. It's a physical social network where, in this case, you've got a social network with 1,729,314 people, and you've got subgroups of that network that crowdfund nodes around the world. Like here's the 166,000 person node in Tokyo, and here's the node in Mumbai, and so on and so forth. And these can be actually like small towns that are essentially networked together around the world. And the annual income and real estate footprint of this network state collectively can be larger than that of a legacy nation state, just like Bitcoin, though it's decentralized, can be larger in value than any centralized currency, right? And I also had in the book, I had a vision or visual of how you could build a network state, which is you could literally start from a single person like this. Let me show you this GIF. Start for a single person, go to 17, 172, 1,700, 17,000, 170,000, 1.7 million. So you basically, just like Zuck starting the social network from his dorm room, you could start the social network, scale it, have people crowdfund territory, and then just keep going and knit them together. And eventually, just like Bitcoin eventually became the national currency of El Salvador, you become large enough, and eventually you get diplomatic recognition, right? So what we're doing with Network School is related to this, which is it's a community. I wouldn't call it a country for a long time, maybe never, okay? But what it is something where we are starting. Can you see the screen there with that image?
Yep.
So we're starting with one large node in the Singapore area. We're going to get this to maybe 2,000-ish or so people. Then we'll open up nodes in probably Miami, certainly Dubai, maybe Japan, other places, India.
You just keep adding.
Bhutan. Yeah. And then we also, this is important, we fund other startup societies around the world, like Zuzulu, which is, Vitalik's, like the Ethereum network state, Don't Die, Brian Johnson's network state, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's what I think of Network School as. It is a startup society that bootstraps other startup societies. So it is both an example, it's both a thing and is an example of the thing. Sort of like how Bitcoin was both a cryptocurrency and was a template that every other cryptocurrency was based off of, where they took Bitcoin and they said, for example, Ethereum is Bitcoin but with programmability, or Zcash is Bitcoin but with privacy. And then Solana is Ethereum but faster, or what have you, right? And so on and so forth. Everything kind of within one or two hops references Bitcoin in its design, right? So even if it swaps out many of the components and so forth, they're all kind of inspired by that. And so that's the purpose here. Imagine if Bitcoin had been built from the very beginning to be something that would give birth to 1,000 cryptocurrencies. You design it somewhat more differently, right? And that's what Network School is. I know I don't have all the answers. Some people will do vegan network states, and some people will do carnivore network states, and some people will do like Latin immersion, and there'll be Mennonites, and there'll be Catholics, and there'll be Jains and Sikhs, and all different kinds of different groups. People, Catalonians, Basques, language groups, cultural groups, ethnic groups, all kinds of stuff that I can't even predict. One of the things after the Network State book came out, for example, do you know what Catalonia is? It's like a community in Spain, right? But they're not Spanish. And they have this whole thing where they kind of fight with Spain. And, without getting into the back and forth of that, they're outnumbered by the Spanish.
The classic battle.
Yeah. They're outnumbered. But they want to preserve their ancient culture, which I respect. So they can take essentially the third option, which is maybe they crowdfund territory somewhere else and they build over there. There's more Irish Americans than there are people in Ireland. Right? So the Irish took that approach. Maybe other people could take that approach. It's not totally crazy. So one thing that's interesting is seeing network state getting taken up by people who are very far afield from the kinds of things I think about. So there's a big story in like a Catalonian language newspaper on that, and so on and so forth. So the point being, I know I don't have all the answers, but I want to develop a template that can allow people to rebuild societies, communities, where they can build together and they can set whatever admission criteria they want. And then maybe we all value Bitcoin and we can all trade between each other with cryptocurrency and so on and so forth. And in a sense, good fences make good neighbors. We can agree to disagree on certain things, and we have our own communities and we're proud of them, but we can also trade between them, peace and trade, if that makes any sense, right? So it's a vision for kind of rebuilding the world on a voluntary basis. All right, let me pause there. So it's both something that's useful, I think, in its own right, but it's also got an ideological purpose.
I love it. I look, I'm a big fan of this. I think that it's very smart, and I don't think people quite understand just how big what you guys are doing. Kind of at the headquarters, if you will. But if anyone wants, they can
come visit. Come visit.
I'm going to come visit. ns.com is where people can go and learn more. Balaji, it's always fantastic to talk to you, man. I could talk to you literally for hours. I appreciate everything that you're doing. Where else should we send people to find you on the internet?
Go to ns.com, and then one other thing I'll put up on screen is our conference is in a few weeks. So Network State Conference, October 3rd, 2025 in Singapore. So come out here. We have Brian Armstrong, we have Vitalik, we have Arthur Hayes, we have all the crypto people, and also lots of the startup societies all speaking. And promises to be a really good time.
Amazing. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. We'll do it again in the future.
All right. Thank you.